Welcome to the Crimson Engine. My name is 𝙁𝙆𝙆𝙆𝙇. Today we are talking the Canon R5C. I've had this for about a week now. I've been putting through its paces, testing all sorts of different shooting formats or different shooting methods, different subjects, different ways to rig the camera. And I wanted to share my initial impressions of the camera, what it does well, what could be improved, and really who is this camera for and is it right for you? So the R5C is a totally new type of camera. It is one that is both a dedicated stills camera with all the stills functionality, and then at the flick of a switch up here, you get a full cinema camera with cinema menus, with false color, with all the things you expect on the cinema camera. In fact, it is almost indistinguishable from the C70 on which I'm shooting this. It's so similar, in fact, that it is a little bit of a mind melt to try and go between the two cameras. They are 90% similar with how they're laid out, but one button is just not there on the other one, and the dial is just a little bit different. You have to mentally change gears to go between the two of them. Not necessarily a bad thing, it just goes to show how similar they are, but not identical. R5C has a full frame 8K sensor versus the Super 35 4K sensor on the C70. So you're going to get much higher resolution, which gives you the freedom to deliver in a higher format and still move around your image. It gives you the ability to crop in on the sensor to Super 35 and to Super 16, essentially giving you just two internal lenses. So you can shoot on a 24mm, crop in and be on a 35mm, essentially the same thing as a 35mm, and crop in again and be the same as a 50mm. And critically, the image loses none of its sharpness and none of its dynamic range. You can always just shoot 8K RAW on the R5C and then crop in on post, but that's a lot of work. It's very processor intensive. It gives you the ability to make those decisions after you've shot. But when you're shooting a Super 16 crop, a 2K crop of an 8K, you're really just using the very middle little bit of the frame, and especially on the small monitor on this, it's very hard to tell what that image is going to look like. Much better to crop in the camera, use it like a 2x zoom extender, and get some really great close-up footage. Something I really appreciated about having on the R5C is the EVF. It has the little electronic viewfinder that you can look through if you're shooting on bright sunny days. You don't have to worry about how bright the glare is on the monitor, or bringing an external monitor like this. You can always lift the camera up to your eye and shield the sun with your hand and get a great idea of what your image is going to look like, what your menus are, what your exposure is. Which is weird because I owned the C200B, which didn't have the EVF because I thought the EVF was just totally in the wrong place on the side of the camera, where it usually is on a cinema camera, but on the back. Canon sort of did away with it completely on the C70, but then preserved it on the R5C, and it does come in really handy, especially when shooting with just the camera without external screens and batteries. Speaking of batteries, the limitations on this camera do revolve around power. You can get up to 30p in RAW in full 8K. After that, you are going to lose your ability to focus on an autofocus lens. To go higher than that, you need to add external power. You need to keep the camera with a dummy battery, either plugged into the wall, or connect the dummy battery to a 𝙒𝙊𝙉𝙉𝙉𝙀 adapter, so you can power it off that. There's also the option to use a Anchor power brick. When the camera's on a tripod, it's very easy just to attach the V-mount to the leg of the tripod, and you almost forget about it. But if you're shooting handheld, it's probably a better idea to stick to the XF-AVC format because it gives you much more flexibility without needing to add extra power. Speaking of the XF-AVC, it is hugely welcome coming from the R5, which only had RAW or H.265, which was difficult to work with, processor intensive, a drop down in quality. The XF-AVC on this camera, much like the XF-AVC on the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II, is just such a great codec. It has almost all of the detail information of the RAW. For a fraction of the size, it gives you high frame rates, up to 120p in 4K full frame. And I did some tests with the RAW and the XF-AVC. I couldn't find the difference. You have more flexibility with your white balance in the RAW because you can shoot totally in the wrong white balance and then adapt it in post. Other than that, not really. I didn't see any compression artifacts when I sharpened the XF-AVC compared to the RAW. And the RAW limits you in having to shoot the full resolution of the sensor, which at full frame is 8K, giving you very large files. Even though they have added some compression options for the RAW, they have full quality, middle quality, and a light RAW light. When I got hold of this camera, I thought I would shoot everything in RAW, but after a couple of tests, the XF-AVC stands up even better. If you are looking to get this camera, definitely check out canonmasterclass.com. I have a ton of tutorials, including an upcoming, it should be out in the next couple of weeks, an R5C masterclass, which will take you through the entire workflow of this camera, all the way from setup to menus to shooting modes, focus, exposure, white balance, vertical video, slow motion, cinema rig, all the way to post-production and audio outputs. Check it out at canonmasterclass.com. Really appreciate that you can customize the buttons on the R5C, being able to turn view assist on and off with the press of a button, or the waveform on and off with the press of a button. The ports aren't always where you would want them, especially the HDMI port. If you flip the screen out and want to do self-recording, the HDMI is right where you would want to watch it. I got around this by having a left angle HDMI, but HDMI still is not the best format in the world. It easily comes loose. The cables don't last very long, and sometimes you have to plug and unplug multiple times for your screen to detect it. That said, it is amazing to work on a larger monitor. This is a TV Logic 5-inch. I also have my 7-inch, especially when shooting in such high resolution in 8. If you're able to monitor that in 4K or 2K, you get a much better idea of the image that you're capturing rather than the little screen on the side, which, while it's great that it's there, doesn't give that much information. I prefer to leave the small screen on the side with all the data and the log readout, and then give a clean LUT adjusted feed to the external monitor. So it gives you a really thorough idea of what your final image is going to look like on a bigger screen. I'm really glad that they gave it 2 card ports. I've been mainly recording on the CFast, but the SD really comes in handy, especially with the V90s that I have for the C70. I got great 4K full frame slow motion on my V90s, and it really helps when you accidentally leave your main card at home. It's good to have a backup. Audio is a little bit of a downside of this camera. It only has the quarter jack. It has our cool little powered hot shoe up here, which will be able to attach Tascam XLR adapter, which will be both powered and connected to the camera without any other cables. It will communicate all through the hot shoe. 0 overheating issues, despite shooting with this thing for a couple of hours. And you see that there is this pushed out part of the camera to give the fan vent. To sum up, my overall impression of this is that really Canon threw everything at this. They allowed it to be a fully featured stills camera. Any photographer in the entire world would be proud to own. Has everything you need as far as those features go, but then at the flick of a switch, it becomes a fully featured cinema camera. So you no longer have to be running 2 different rigs if you're capturing both of those things. You really get the best of both worlds. There really isn't anything that they didn't put on here that they could have. Yes, it would be nice to have an SDI, but even the significantly larger C70 didn't have room for that. Surprisingly, I didn't miss the internal ND of the C70 at all. Since all of my lenses are EF, I was able to get this EF to RF adapter that has an internal ND built in to the adapter. So I can go from 2 to 5 stops with actually more control than the C70 has in my EF lens adapter. It comes in super handy for shooting in low depth of field, or like T1.5 like I have on these lenses, in bright sunlight and still getting a really cool image. The R5 cage from Small Rig fit this great. I was able to put monitor on it, able to keep it on rails, able to put base plates on different parts of the camera for vertical video. I don't want to use the word game changer that much, but I think a lot of people who are primarily photographers but have always wanted to get into video, this is absolute no-brainer of a choice. You get to upgrade to essentially an R5 without IBIS, and you get a C70, full frame C70 with 8K sensor for an extra couple $100.